We are just one day away from the 2026 Michigan Democratic primary, and one day away from this tense battle concluding and a Democratic nominee officially being chosen for the state of Michigan on the Senate level. Now, I say this because this Michigan primary has been very tense, as from this article by the New York Times lays it out. Michigan's tense Democratic Senate primary poses a big test for a divided party, and tomorrow we're going to find out how Michigan voters are looking, specifically Democratic voters, at how the future of the party should go. Should we go with a more moderate choice similar to that of Haley Stevens, or should we go for a more progressive choice of that of Abdul Assed? We're going to find out the answer to that tomorrow, but I want to lay out the prediction and how we think this race is going to go tomorrow, and this will be my final prediction on the state of Michigan as far as the Democratic primary goes. Of course, we'll continue to talk about this up until the general election in November, but of course this will be the final video on the Democratic primary, and I'll ultimately leave my final prediction at the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. That said, let's take a look at some of the most recent polling on this Senate race in the state of Michigan. Latest polling has Abdul Assed up around 19, 17, 14 percentage points on average. The Emerson College poll from the 26th through the 27th of July had Abdul Assed at 16% above Haley Stevens. So overall, polling-wise, Abdul Assed looks very comfortable going into tomorrow and looks like a prime choice for the Democrats to choose in tomorrow's election in the state of Michigan. But, of course, we're not going to necessarily rule out the possibility that Haley Stevens wins, but I want to start with that and look at the polling and where things stand on the race in general. Of course, polls absolutely can be wrong, but overall, some of the most reliable pollsters have Abdul Assed leading this race and on track to be the Democrats' nominee for the 2026 Senate race. With that said, let's go and take a look at the betting odds. According to Polymarket, Abdul Assed has about a 97.2% chance of winning. Actually, as of 8 o'clock this morning, it switched over to 98%. Not a huge difference there, but still, nonetheless, Haley Stevens sitting in about a 2.1% chance of winning. So betting odds also agree that Assed is in the lead in this race and on track to be that Democratic nominee come tomorrow evening when we officially find out who will win that race. But of course, these numbers can fluctuate over the next 24 hours or so, but at this point, it seems very likely that Abdul Assed is on track to be the Democrats' nominee in the November election and how that's going to play out. So I also want to take a look at the general election and how that is how that is saying that it's going to shape out according to Polymarket as well. As of this morning at 8 o'clock, similar to that of the previous Polymarket betting odd, the Democrats are sitting at about 68% chance of winning the Senate election, and that is with the idea in mind that Mike Rogers is the Republican nominee and Abdul Assed is the Democratic nominee. So still a solid victory for the Democrats, sitting in a position where they're likely to win this race. But if we date back to March, for instance, the Democrats were sitting at about an 82% chance at winning. So this number of 68% certainly is not where it was just a few months ago, sitting at 82%, narrowed down to 68%. A lot of that is contributed to the idea that Abdul Assed is not the strongest candidate amongst Democrats, and that of course can be debated between people. But overall, polls would also tell you that that might just be the case. I mean, if we look if we look at the polling in this race, we'll see that the hypothetical polling between Abdul Assed and Mike Rogers, according to the average polling, Mike Rogers is sitting somewhere between anywhere from roughly nothing to 4.5 percentage points, according to 270 to win. Real Clear Politics, more about a 0.3% margin in favor of Rogers. And that's up until the end of July 31st, 2026. And if we look at overall polling, it's kind of mixed. I mean, really, here we see Mike Rogers leading in some polling by 3% or a percentage point, sometimes tied. And then, of course, we have these polling that says 10%, which is totally ridiculous, in my opinion, at least. I do not believe that, not one bet that Mike Rogers is going to win this race by 10 percentage points. That's not going to happen. But, of course, if we look at the Quantus Insights, we're looking at about a percentage point in favor of Abdul instead of Mike Rogers. Data for Progress, that's similar situation, about a percentage point. Best poll here lately, at least, was back in June 11th through the 14th, where Abdul was about 3% ahead of Mike Rogers. But of course, this polling hasn't been conducted on a strong level because we don't have the Democrats' official nominee. But I do want to take a look, because we looked at Abdul's polling, I do want to take a look at Haley's for a minute and kind of compare the two. For instance, if we look at the overall averages, Haley Stevens is in a much better position, according to Real Clear Politics, about a 1.7% margin, 270 to win, which had Mike Rogers up by 4 points against El Sayed, is virtually tied with Haley Stevens. So certainly a difference here in the general election polling. But of course, again, I think that a lot of this is going to come down to, after we have the official Democratic nominee tomorrow, like I said already, likely to be Abdul El-Sayed, we're going to start seeing more polling in this race, and how this is going to impact the general election, and how much Democrats are really inclined to support Abdul El-Sayed, that including moderate supporters. Of course, Haley Stevens has said that she would support him if he's the Democratic nominee, and Abdul has said the same for Haley Stevens. So a very moderate style finish to a hard-fought, very divisive race at the end of this is the likelihood that both candidates would support their rival. But the instance really is going to come down to it is, how much has this primary hurt Democratic voters? Of course, we'll have to see that. But according to polling, back to that, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of the polling as the days go on. So, of course, we're at the beginning of August now. By the end of August, I would expect that we have some really reliable pollsters polling this race on the general election side of things, and really getting a general idea of where this race stands. Because even if these polls are correct, that Mike Rogers is about 1% to 3 percentage points ahead of Abdul El-Sayed, that doesn't necessarily mean that this race is over and that Mike Rogers is going to win. It may just mean that there are some moderate voters who are skeptical to Abdul's policies and that of a more progressive type of candidate. And it's going to come down to if those voters are willing to support somebody like Abdul El-Sayed, and if Democrats can do a good job at laying out the foundation of how this race is set to take place, really comparing Mike Rogers to Donald Trump. If they can tie that in, that might work very well for them. And overall, making sure that there's no idea of this communist socialism stuff that Donald Trump likes to spew in the air. That's going to be the biggest threat to Democrats if Abdul El-Sayed is the Democratic nominee tomorrow evening. So we'll find out some of those answers in the coming days and how voters are feeling, of course, according to polling. And we'll talk more about that as the days go on. But at this point, to close out this video, let's take a final look at where this stands in the race for the Democratic nomination tomorrow, which is very important and very specific to this race. So, as I said already, Abdul El-Sayed in a lot of these polls on the Democratic primary level is leading Haley Stevens by a pretty significant margin, and likely to go win tomorrow. Especially also looking at that Democratic primary on the Polymarket website as well, looking at about a 98% chance that Abdul El-Sayed wins tomorrow in this primary race. And with that said, I want to go ahead and conclude with my final prediction, which is that Abdul El-Sayed ultimately wins this race by somewhere around 14 to 15 percentage points tomorrow evening. Haley Stevens ultimately losing this race despite receiving key endorsements from Governor Gretchen Whitmer and other prominent moderate Democrats who have been very specific in this race that they believe that Haley Stevens is the best candidate to continue forward. But ultimately, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party is starting to speak, and they're saying that they want different types of leadership, that the AIPAC-style, corporate-funded corporations for funding campaigns such as Haley Stevens is no longer going to cut it. Abdul El-Sayed receiving endorsements from key progressive Democrats such as Bernie Sanders. We've seen Elizabeth Warren support. We're seeing Abdul El-Sayed receive these key endorsements, and it's no surprise here that over a course of period of time, that Democrats are going to be more likely to support candidates such as him going forward, and this Michigan primary is going to be a key example of just that. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate your guys' support. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to the channel and make sure to like this video down below. Of course, let me know what you think, as always, in the comments below. How do you think this race is set to shape out tomorrow evening? Do you believe that Abdul Al-Sayed wins, according to polling and betting odds, and according to my final prediction? Or do you believe that Haley Stevens is ultimately going to pull out an upset, and the moderate Democratic coalition of the Democratic Party is ultimately going to win yet again? Let me know again in the comments below what you think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you guys again so much for watching.